Dan and Amy.
I'm going to play you in tennis.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay.
I'm an old man like Bobby Riggs. They'll still run you around the court. All right. A couple of important Supreme Court decisions yesterday. One on the matter of religious liberty, the Trinity United decision. The other on President Trump's temporary travel ban on individuals from certain countries, Muslim-majority countries, to focus on the quality of America's vetting of individuals coming from those countries that have a history of being incubators of terrorism. That was the rationale.
Yeah, and if they don't have a family member here or a job here or attending a university, then they're not going to be allowed in.
Right.
Until they're properly vetted.
So that was a qualified affirmation, it seems to me, of the executive's wide berth on immigration-related law. Andy McCarthy writing in National Review, it wasn't much of a victory for Trump for that very reason. Alito, Gorsuch, and Thomas were willing to adopt the travel ban
entirely,
the
right?
temporary travel ban in toto, but that wasn't the majority opinion. And, of course, then you've got left-wing senators who want the court to legislate because they believe Congress should just hold hearings. Congress should do law enforcement, and the Supreme Court should do lawmaking, apparently, in the minds of some D.C. politicians, including Senator Ed Markey, who didn't exactly get the holding of the Supreme Court on the travel ban right. He's a liberal from Massachusetts.
I'm disappointed that the court just didn't rule that a Muslim ban in and of itself is unconstitutional. That goes right to the heart of the Statue of Liberty, staring at the Trump Tower in New York City every single day in terms of what it stands for. But this first decision with regard to the overreach for businesses, for family members, for students coming to the country, that's good. But it still doesn't deal with this fundamental flaw in the Trump order, which is that at its heart, it is a Muslim ban. And it says to all refugees, if you're a Muslim, you cannot come to the United States of America.
Of course, that's not what it says at all. I mean, that is just factually wrong. Black letter of the order wrong. But that's the hysterics you get from the left. Listen to Senator Mazie Hirono, Democrat from Hawaii, on Gorsuch, Alito, and Thomas, and what might be coming if Justice Kennedy retires. You know what's coming. The apocalypse.
Talks about everything is great, wonderful. It's still a Muslim ban. And by lifting a part of the injunction, by creating a category of people who will be able to come in, by showing some kind of bona fide relationship with people or institutions in our country, I don't know what that means. And by the way, Neil Gorsuch, who I did not support as a Supreme Court justice, he's joined two of the most conservative justices, Clarence Thomas and Alito, on the court to take the position that the entire injunction should have been lifted. This is like the three horsemen of the apocalypse, and they're waiting for the fourth one to come along so that they can go on their trend toward what I call extremism.
Oh, she's coined the term extremism. That's what she calls it. Yeah, so there you go. Those are the scholarly opinions of the left as represented by two of their esteemed senators. For more on the topic and the actual legal implications and the basis for the decisions, we're pleased to be joined by Walter Olson, who is a senior fellow at the Cato Institute Center for Constitutional Studies. Walter, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
So why don't we start with the travel ban, the temporary travel ban that was Trump's executive order adjudicated by the court yesterday. This sort of split decision, in the words of Andy McCarthy over at National Review, in terms of the, as Amy mentioned, this if you have a connection to an American here standard, and what McCarthy calls the jurisprudence of Trump, meaning that the Supreme Court is adjudicating cases differently for President Trump than they would if somebody else was president.
Yeah, let's start with that first point, which is the legal basis of having to have an American connection. And despite what Senator Mazie Hirono just said she can't imagine why they did it that way, there is a legal connection, which is, the court starts from the history of this area of law where generally the person who is abroad has no right to come here, but someone in the United States who might be their spouse or their employer or whatever, they might have rights connected with their immigration. So that's why it's very much in line with previous law for them to draw a distinction between people who have some sort of sponsor or connection here and people who don't. Now, on the second point, it's one of the points that's very significant for what did not happen in the court's action yesterday. It's like Sherlock Holmes and the Dog in the Night. One of the things that did not happen is that they did not treat it as if all the law is out the window because this president is so strange. And let's face it, that's exactly what the Ninth Circuit and some other places did. Instead, the Supreme Court analyzed it just the same way as if any other president had given the order. It was calm. It was going to apply the same laws that it would have, and that bodes well for President Trump, not because his order is perfect, because flaws are found in it, but because he loses a lot of points he otherwise would have won because of this Trump is special atmosphere.
What about the other aspects of the travel ban? Is that going to be revisited then again in the fall?
It will be revisited, and let me mention the second thing that didn't happen, which is that the extreme liberal position of the Ninth Circuit didn't get a single vote, and I think that's one of the most important things that happened. Mm-hmm. Is that not Ruth Ginsburg, not Sonia Sotomayor, none of them were willing to go out on a limb for most of the stuff that the Fourth and Ninth Circuits were doing. Now, that having been said, they did leave some of the injunction in place. At this point, it gets complex because topics that usually only lawyers care about, like mootness, is there still a controversy? Has it been resolved by the fall? A lot of things can happen between now and the fall. That is going to offer not only an intellectual puzzle, but also possibly a tactical way for justices who might want to get it off their plate and not have to decide big issues. They might say, oh, it's moot. The order has changed, or they've completed the review, or whatever the thing is.
But what they did leave open is the possibility that this issue is going to be litigated, at least for the existence of the temporary travel ban, which is only to the fall, because you can say, you're litigating the matter of a bona fide relationship with an American.
Exactly. There will be individual disputes about what that language means, and there will also be the big dispute. And it could be that everyone wants to have an answer, and that we will get that answer. Again, I predict from what the court has done so far that it will be an answer that is much more protective of traditional presidential prerogatives and federal prerogatives than some of what we were hearing from the ACLU earlier this year. But
the important thing, just going back to your point about the 9-0 decision with respect to the liberal appellate courts, the other thing that's important here is that essentially they rejected this idea that a political candidate's campaign statements should inform legal decisions.
They refused to treat that as dispositive evidence. Doesn't mean it may not rear its head again, but again, very significant because we heard so much about, from now on, everyone's campaign statements, maybe 10 years earlier, maybe 20 years earlier, maybe what they said in high school, they're all going to be put into the sausage machine of finding animus and finding prejudice, and the Supreme Court did not go there. They used other legal materials, and I think implicitly they were frowning on that because they see, it could lead anywhere or nowhere if you start doing that.
Yeah, and another big, story making news out of the Supreme Court yesterday. They ruled 7-2 that it's unconstitutional for the state of Missouri to treat churches and other religious organizations worse than everyone else simply because they are religious. That's in regards to the Lutheran Church that wanted to apply for a grant to improve their playground.
Mm-hmm. And again, note what the consensus was broader than people thought. They got 2 of the 4 liberal justices to sign on, which is why it was 7-2. The court is in a very different place from the old Earl Warren court, which was going around looking for ways to build walls between the government and religion. They recognized that if you go too far in that direction, you wind up discriminating against religious institutions. And it's so humdrum to talk about shredding tires, but in a way, it lets us be objective. They're not talking about school books. They're not talking about, something to get into religious instruction. They're just talking about whether kids can be a little safer if they are playing on a jungle gym. And when it's that kind of neutral program, if you let everyone else participate in it, so said Stephen Justice, you got to let a church participate in it too.
Yeah, and that's despite the fact, and this gives you some kind of indication of how the court is split on matters of religious liberty. Sonia Sotomayor argued that the court's opinion was a radical mistake. Radical mistake. That's so you still have this kind of anti-religiosity, this idea among some, even on the high court, that the Establishment Clause means separation of church and state rather than the establishment of a national religion.
Well, to be fair, the court's jurisprudence on religion has been so confused and so inconsistent for years. No one comes off looking all that well. But from Sotomayor's point of view and from a lot of critics, they are looking at the school situation. They are terribly worried that someday there may be vouchers or tax credits that put religious and public schools on more of an even footing. And so anything that takes even a tiny step toward that, they will sound the alarms. But the fact is that not everything is about schools.
Well, but also, too, I mean, just on the matter of school choice, I think you're right to raise that the fear that the left has. The Zellman case, that's precedential at this point, which is as long as the parent is making the decision with the resources and you're not granting the resources, the scholarship resources directly to the school, then you can have a school choice program like the Cleveland case that was at bar in that case.
Oh, right. No, I just, reading the periodicals on the left and so forth, I just see, it quickly gets into a kind of teachers' union, the labyrinth of literature where they spend a lot of time thinking about that. And as the conservatives have pointed out, you can't actually press the logic in the opposite direction without getting to absurdities such as the fire department shouldn't send out a team for a burning church. I mean, obviously,
right.
The government is all the time handing out equal services to churches in many ways. And so, I think Seven Justices said this is common sense. If you want to bring us tougher cases, then we'll decide those. But this is not a very tough case.
All right. He is Walter Olson, Senior Fellow at the Cato Institute Center for Constitutional Studies. Walter, thanks so much for joining us. I appreciate your insights.
Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's news.